So, I got up this morning and I saw that Sargon of Akkad had another interview last night that I did not catch live because it was Sabbath and I do honor the holy day with my family. However, I did listen to it this morning and it was a very pleasant interview slash discussion between Sargon and Destiny about different expectations between men and women, who bears the most burden, who is being held most responsible, so on and so forth, and the contradictions and the double standards from both sides of that discussion. Do women have an obligation to the future? Do men have an obligation to the future? How are those different realities expressed and how do we interact with them? It was a very, you could tell that Sargon was really trying to reach over to Destiny and try to bring him across, and I think that between them there was a lot of headway, but ultimately the entire tenor of the discussion seemed lackluster. It didn't. Here's the problem. The attempts by secularists to replace the ethos and the power that religion has had on society as a form of cohesive, as a form of moral enforcement, it's always going to fall flat. It's always going to fall short because religion has been around long enough to have battled out intrinsically and instinctively, not just on the egg-headed philosophical level, but on the gut and instinctive level, how humans should interact with one another and provide a means of happiness and prosperity for most individuals. Granted that you are not a godless revolutionary, religious institutions tend to provide a very generic, basic framework for which men and women can interact reasonably and joyfully. They have instituted boundaries and customs which not only respect the sexes and their inherent strengths, but they also find ways to make sure that both are on relatively equal terms insofar as those religious systems were developed and the time frame in which they were developed. And obviously Christianity is by far the most capable of adapting to the changing times. And I think what they are recognizing, or that they're coming to recognize, I hope what they're coming to recognize, is that it is not the fault of religion that mankind has failed to assess morality beyond the scope of our technological ability. Let me try and say that again. It is not the fault of religion that man has failed to account for the impact the impact on human society that technology has caused, and the moral ramifications thereof. That was me trying to paraphrase what I just said. In essence, just because we've discovered that we can do something, we haven't really discovered the impact and the ramifications of how those things will affect us further down the line. And the secularist critique of religion that we have not caught up with the times is highly arrogant. And I would say that only in the past decade to the past half decade, we really haven't really discovered the ramifications of human secularist technological approach how that has affected our humanity. And while it has been commonplace for secularists to fault religion for not being up with the times, shall we say that our technological advances haven't caught up to our... No, that's not correct. We have not given our humanity a chance to catch up with these technological developments. Obviously, this is for a couple of reasons. One, the premise, of course, that most secularists have, that morality itself is a form of technology, that it develops over time, and that as we become more moral, society adapts accordingly, and that is, of course, bullshit. It's not true in any way, shape, or form, and I understand that that's one of the foundational premises that they are working under, that morality itself is a technology that we are developing over time. And that theory falls flat on its face. And it falls flat on its face because there are several moral hopes and expectations given as far as the Old Testament that we weren't capable of living and fulfilling until recently. In other words, the expectation that slavery would be abolished was literally cemented in Old Testament law. There's Old Testament law that says, if you find a slave from a master, you shall not report the slave to their master. In other words, the Old Testament law was not very accommodating to slave owners. And this should have been the impetus for which we, look forward to our technology being able to catch up to our morality. There has been a significant gap between the morality hoped for in the Bible to our ability to live that hope for morality. Therefore, I'm convinced, because I'm not ignorant of biblical morality, that morality is a technology. The Christian beatitudes that Christ gave on the Sermon on the Mount were not suggestions. They weren't experimented upon. They were commandments. And the fact that they weren't experimented on means that, they are kind of outside the purview of technological advancement, because they, once again, were not experiments. They were commandments. And so, of course, looking throughout history, I think it's rather self-evident that it is technology that allows us to live up to the morality we have always aspired to. And that completely falls outside of what the progressives are pushing today. And that's kind of what's frustrating me. Is Destiny said in that discussion that we have contraception and abortion to help alleviate women's sexual responsibility, and that could be a net good. And society changes over time, and we need to accept that societies change, and therefore there's nothing to do about it. And I vehemently disagree. There is never at any point in which it should be moral to seek an abortion or to use abortion as a way to equalize the sexes. That's both morally and theologically and Darwinistically bullshit. You offend God and Darwin when you make such stupid egg-headed statements, equating the act of an abortion with society evolving, or society becoming this society using technological advances like abortion as a moral force for good. That is a bunch of horseshit. But because they are secularists, these things are going to slip through the cracks, and they're going to infest society and have an effect far later and with far more damaging ramifications. And we see this already. We see how there is this devil's pact between various industries, between prostitution, between human trafficking, between immigration, between the porn industry. There are There is an unholy alliance between these things that Destiny is trying to push as cultural goods that society is kind of devolving into, and suggesting that, moving in this direction is no different than any other direction we've ever taken. And that is, of course, wrong. There are bad directions and there are good directions, and the direction of abortion and its ilk is clearly a bad direction with bad consequences, with negative effects on people living in that society, both in the short term and in the long term. Whether it is the trauma of a woman going through an abortion that she was told would be simple and overnight, to being a prolonged procedure where she is question is, how will the secularist discern when such a change or development is good or bad? How does the secularist know to define what evil is so they don't cross that line? Because all the secularist has is a greater good. That's all they have. And the beauty about being religious or having a religion and believing in a God is that rather than fight for these greater goods and then later permitting atrocities in service to those greater goods, you simply have a God who declares, this is evil, thou shalt not, this is the line. And it's far more liberating, it's far more fulfilling, it is far more successful, and it creates far more happiness to have those lines drawn and allow individuals and families and communities to do literally everything but. And that's pretty much all of and because we are working with secularism, there's no way to get to that point. You cannot define evil with secularism, because defining evil requires a moral authority to do so. And secularism will absolutely not be capable of creating this absolute moral authority, because every time they've tried, it's become something akin to scientism, which has not only betrayed us and become anti-truth in its very nature and tyrannical in that very nature, but it's also led us down to a pack of lies. Now, there are some edgelords in the comments who might suggest that religion has done the same thing, but again, I'm not going to make any apologies or statements except for that which I know to be true, which is Christianity. So you're just going to have to cope with that. So that's where we're at. That's and the discussion pretty much ended on Sargon and Destiny pretty much harmonizing in a very weird way. Well, obviously there was a lot of that discussion that left unsaid. There was a lot in that discussion that Sargon didn't go into because, he was looking for common ground rather than battleground, and that much is obvious. And I don't think he should have pushed the issue. If he wants to try and, lure Destiny into a more reasonable and human position, well, then, Godspeed with that. That is, as I've said before, family is everything. And if we can get basic lefties to default back to the family being the net good for society, then we might actually be able to salvage our country. We might be able to salvage this god-awful situation that we're in. But anyways, so I watched it. These are my thoughts on it, and everyone, stay carnal and God bless.